All right. Hello, everyone. Salam, namaste, adab, and welcome to today's event. Today, we have two very distinguished foreign policy experts from India, senior diplomats, and they are going to talk on Gaza war and after. The main speaker is Ambassador Talmiz Ahmad, who is a former ambassador to Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Oman. Uh, Talmiz Saab joined the Foreign Service in 1974, and he had been in different capacities, mostly in Middle East, but as well as also in New York, London, and Pretoria. Later on, served as Indian ambassador, as I said, to Saudi Arabia twice, Oman, UAE, and then he also was additional secretary for international cooperation, the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas. Later on, he was awarded a Saudi government medal first class honor. Uh, and then after retirement, he joined a corporate sector in Dubai. Later on, he became a full-time academic and holds a Ram Sathe Chair in International Studies, Symbiosis International University, Pune. He is a good author of four books, which are displayed here in the poster. Reform in the Arab World, Another Children of Abraham at War, A Clash of Messianic Militarism and Islamic Challenges in the West Asia. And his latest book is West Asia at War, Repression, Resistance, and Great Power Games. Uh, and as you know, we have a uh, expert discussant, Ambassador Notej Sarnaji, who is going to do the concluding remarks. He's a former ambassador to our here, USA, Israel, and High Commissioner to United Kingdom. And he has also served in Moscow, Warsaw, Tehran, Geneva, and Washington, D.C. So now, Sarnaji is also a good author of 4, 5 books, which includes novels Crimson Spring, The Exile, and We Were Not Lovers Like That, and later a historical travel narrative, Indians at Herod's Gate. So we have really a wide spectrum here of experience in diplomacy in various countries of importance, especially in the Middle East. And you are going to hear good story or a bad story on Gaza war and after. That's the topic, outlook for regional and world order. So I welcome you all and now invite Ambassador Talmiz Ahmad for the talk. Talmiz.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be with you. The last 2 years have been extraordinarily momentous as far as West Asia is concerned. Just one moment. Let me. Are you able to see the PowerPoint?
Yes, if you can put in the slide presentation mode, that will be better.
Yeah, I'll do that. Yes.
Thank you.
This is an extraordinarily momentous period for West Asia. Please remember that in India, we don't say Middle East, we say West Asia. So forgive me if some of you get confused. So as West Asia, it has been extraordinarily momentous, very, very dramatic. And indeed, there are suggestions, including by the principal protagonists, that the region has changed, fundamentally changed in terms of its power structures and its geopolitics. Very quickly, there have been 4 major events over the last 21 months. The Hamas attacked Israel on 7th October 2023 and commenced an extraordinary conflict that is still ongoing, and several thousand Palestinians have been killed. The second is in part of its assault on its enemies in the region, Israel has effectively destroyed the axis of resistance. That is, the hostile elements within Hamas, hostile elements in Gaza, as well as in Lebanon, and also those who were located in Syria. There have been sporadic attacks in Iraq and the Houthis in Yemen, but effectively, with the collapse of Hezbollah as a fighting force, the axis of resistance appears to have withered away. There has also been regime change in Damascus, and Iran has lost a very major ally, an ally of 50 years. Bonded with Iran, the two countries were bonded on the platform of resistance. That has been overturned. You now have a new regime, a regime of very strange origin, very close affiliation with the jihadi elements that the Americans have fought for so long. But now you have their leader as the president in Damascus and one who had an encounter with President Trump very recently. And finally, you have the Israel US war on Iran, which has just concluded a few days ago. So let us take a look at what all has happened. Going back to the Gaza scenario, the dominant figure in Israeli affairs for several years is Prime Minister Netanyahu. He has been the longest serving prime minister in the country. He is he is known as Mr. Security, an image that he has himself promoted. But he's also known to be an extraordinarily wily individual. His biographers have pointed out that every time you think that he's down in politics, he has the capacity to rise up all over again. He has his central focus as far as regional affairs is concerned is to project the primacy of the threat from Iran as far as the region is concerned, and has also spoken for at least 20 years or more about Iran developing a nuclear weapons capacity. For him, the core threat to the Jewish state is from Iran, and has suggested to the Americans quite successfully that Israel can re-engage with the Arab states in the region without having to address any aspect of Palestinian aspirations. He has been successful in this regard, and very recently, in August 2020, as many as 4 Arab countries indicated a certain normalization of relations with Israel, principal among them being the UAE. Sudan has withered away because of civil conflict, and Morocco has downgraded the relationship and is largely a civil aviation contact so that people of Moroccan origin living in Israel can visit their ancestral homes. As a result of the election results in December 2022, Netanyahu formed an extreme right-wing government. He included in his coalition extremist elements who had been at the margins of Israeli politics and were regarded as extraordinarily xenophobic, racist, and violent. One of them became the finance minister with responsibility for the West Bank, and the other became the national security minister. It is in this background that you found a very dramatic development, not directly connected with what we are talking about, the rapprochement engineered by the Chinese of Saudi Arabia and the Iranians in March 2023. This appeared to take away from the expectations that the Americans and the Israelis had at that point, that you could somehow attract Saudi Arabia into the normalization process. If you look at the situation just before the present conflict, the attack from Hamas, there was already a lot of unrest in Israel as a result of domestic issues, not connected with the Palestine issue, domestic issues, where Netanyahu was seen to be seeking to protect himself from the legal processes initiated against him because of personal misconduct, corruption, etc. So he then attempted to change laws relating to the judicial process, because of which you had all those demonstrations. There were certain other provocative developments connected with his ministers. One of them marched through the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and there was a lot of turmoil at that time, and also made provocative statements. And on the other side, in the West Bank, you saw these two extremist ministers deliberately encouraging violence by the settlers there, giving them weaponry and using state forces against the Palestinians. So already from the beginning of 2023, you already were seeing massive assaults on the Palestinians, and about 600 Palestinians had been killed in the West Bank. It appears in retrospect that Israel took its eyes off Gaza. The sense in Tel Aviv was that Gaza is passive. Hamas is more interested in looking out for its own power and its own governance issues, and that the real challenge that Israel faces is in the West Bank. Quite separate from all this, the Americans were actively involved in talking to the Saudis about normalization of relations with Israel. And there were leaks in the American media, not so much in the Saudi press, but leaks in the American media that these talks had made considerable progress. We were told that the Saudis had put certain conditions on the table. There was also a certain period when it appeared that Israel was not interested, because the conditions the Saudis had put, there were certain bilateral conditions that pertain to the Americans in regard to their approving a civilian nuclear program in Saudi Arabia, providing state of the art weaponry to the Saudis, and also agreeing to a security agreement with Saudi Arabia, in terms of which the United States would come to the assistance of Saudi Arabia if it was threatened. Separate from all this, the Saudis also conveyed to the American interlocutors that they were interested, they wanted to ensure that the Palestinian interest, that the Palestinian issue should be addressed as well, and that there must be real, genuine progress with regard to Palestine. So this is where we were up to September 2023. The attempt between the Saudis and Secretary of State Blinken to have an arrangement of a bilateral character excluding Israel, because Netanyahu showed no interest whatsoever in discussing any matter relating to the Palestinians in order to keep his coalition intact. There was this attempt, but Jake Sullivan, the then national security advisor, made a public statement saying that there could be no agreement between the US and Saudi Arabia without the Israelis. Now, it is in this background that you have the Gaza. Or Gaza is, if you were to look at the map that I have put there, even when you look at just Israel, you can barely see Gaza. You can see the West Bank, you can see Sinai, you can see Israel, but you can hardly see Gaza. This is not shocking. Gaza is all of 41 kilometers long, and at its widest is 13 kilometers. But 2.3 million people, all Palestinians, live there. There is no settlement in Gaza because Gaza was vacated by the Israelis in 2006, but it is subject to blockade. There is an land, air, and sea blockade, and the unemployment in the enclave is about 60%. Many commentators have referred to Gaza as either a concentration camp or the world's largest prison, open air prison. On 7th October 2023, the Hamas attacked. They attacked in Israel. This was the harshest attack the Jewish community had experienced since the Holocaust. 1,200 were killed, including 400 soldiers, but 240 were also taken hostage. A beleaguered government, seriously shocked and traumatized, then went in for vengeance. And from that day till today, you find a massive military assault from Israel on the people of Gaza. So far, in direct fighting and killing, 56,000 Palestinians have been killed, 65% of them women and children. The population of Gaza has shifted several times, and almost all of them have been displaced at some time or the other. In the bombardment, almost all the infrastructure has been demolished, and there has been a deliberate and specific targeting of medical personnel and hospitals, relief agencies, and media persons. There was a certain ceasefire on the eve of Donald Trump becoming president. He insisted that there should be a ceasefire and sent his emissary to Tel Aviv and was able to ensure that a ceasefire was arranged. It was difficult at that time to know whether it would go through or not. There was an opinion which said that it would never go through. And another opinion, including myself, felt that if Donald Trump has insisted on such an agreement, and if he has given his personal stamp in this regard, it would be very difficult for Israel to back off. We were wrong. Within 2 months after Donald Trump had settled in the White House, you saw that Israel now reneged on the agreement and began a fresh assault upon Gaza. And he has instituted something which we didn't have before, a humanitarian blockade. That means no humanitarian supplies will be allowed in. There was deliberate assault on hospitals, and because the people had moved back and forth in the refugee centers. From that day till today, from March till now, about 6,000 Palestinians have been killed, and several hundred thousand have been displaced all over again. Every day, without fail, at least 50 to 80, sometimes more, people are killed. And all the entire international community is fully familiar with this. There is a lot of anger about this, and there has been a fresh hearing in the International Court of Justice, which has passed strictures on Israel, but it has had no impact whatsoever. There has been talk of a truce and a ceasefire. What Israel wants is a temporary ceasefire so they can get their remaining hostages. As far as Hamas is concerned, they want a permanent ceasefire. This is not acceptable to the Israelis, but on the beginning of the conflict, Netanyahu had said that he will annihilate Hamas. Many people had told him that you cannot annihilate a militant movement. A militant movement emerges from the certain realities on the ground. Even Biden is quoted in Bob Woodward's book War that he's telling Netanyahu that you cannot annihilate Hamas. Hamas is an idea, and even if you keep on killing people, they are able to get more and more cadres. And just before the Biden administration left and made way for Donald Trump, Blinken actually said in a public statement just a week before handing over power that that the Hamas cadres had been fully replenished. This is where we are. The second aspect of this, while this Hamas war was going on in Gaza, I have also pointed out that the axis of resistance has been annihilated, militarily annihilated. After the Iran Iraq war, the Iranians had developed a military strategy in terms of which they would have where their that the fighting would be far from their national borders, and they built up proxy forces in Gaza through Hamas, Hezbollah, particularly a very powerful fighting movement in Lebanon. They also had an ally in Syria, and they built up Shia militia to support them in Iraq. And later on, in a very different context, when there was an encounter between Saudi Arabia and the Houthis, they also built up close ties with the Houthis, who played a role in this conflict. For the first time in this scenario, there were also direct tit for tat military exchanges between Israel and Iran in August 2024. The first exchanges appeared to be deliberately controlled in the sense that neither side wanted the conflict to get out of hand. But in the case, what the Israelis did was they focused on Hezbollah, and in a two very dramatic events. Number one, they assassinated Ismail Haniyeh, the Hamas leader in Tehran, and in September 2024, they had inserted bombs or explosives in the equipment, the communication equipment that the Hamas had, and several thousand of them, including top leaders, were killed. Within a few days of this, the head of the at that time the head of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, was also assassinated. There is now a truce with Lebanon, but it's an uneasy truce, and from time to time, the Israelis attack certain Hezbollah targets. After this, there was a more serious military encounter between Iran and the Israelis. Many Israeli Iranian targets were hit. At that time, Israel announced to us that the air defenses of Iran have been completely destroyed, and Iran is today naked as far as external assault is concerned. A dramatic victory then for the Israelis was the killing of Yahya Sinwar, who is regarded as the leader and the military commander of Hamas. So you would imagine at this point that as far as Israel is concerned, it has annihilated its enemies and is now absolutely in control of the situation. Quite separate from everything that I have said to you so far, we also took our eyes off Syria, and I am one of them, because we noted for a certain period the rehabilitation of Bashar al Assad in the Arab camp. Many ministers started visiting Syria. Syria also started sending its emissary abroad. Bashar al Assad himself started traveling to Arab capitals and was welcomed in the Arab League. While all this was happening, and one thought that it was all okay, we had taken our eyes off Aleppo. In Aleppo and its environment, you had resistance movement. And you had this resistance movement led by the former commander of Jabhat Nusra, which was originally affiliated with the Islamic State and had then declared he had cut off ties with the Islamic State and had declared his affiliation with Al Qaeda. He was at that time called Abu Muhammad Jolani. Abu Muhammad, during the period the Islamic State was powerful, he had gone into the background. But suddenly, when all our eyes were focused on Damascus, from Aleppo, a military movement began, and it went to steadily march southward and occupied Damascus. Within a 10-day period, you saw this series of events that this ragtag bunch was able, after one or two conflicts, the Syrian army disappeared, and this group, Jabhat Nusra, now calling itself Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, was able to occupy Damascus, and their leader, Abu Muhammad Jolani, went back to his original name, Ahmad al-Shara, and became president of the Syrian Republic. He is now the president. Astonishingly, when Donald Trump was visiting Riyadh, in May in just a short while ago, a few weeks ago, Ahmad had a half-hour meeting with the American president. Just 5 or 6 months earlier, there had been a bounty of $20 million on his head. And that is what has happened. Astonishingly, you find that here is the person who is now completely has changed the geopolitics of Syria. Syria, which has for 50 years been the ally of Iran and part of the resistance front, was now part of the Western alliance. Initially, the Israelis hammered the Syrians and destroyed a large part of their military capabilities. But we know over the last several weeks there has been direct dialogue between them. And I have suggested that I would not be shocked if we were to read very soon that they have normalized ties with each other. This would be an this would be an extraordinary achievement for Israel, that they would get one of the most important Arab countries now normalizing relations with them. How did this happen? Soon after the departure of Bashar al-Assad, my own view was, at that time speculative, but since then confirmed, that this was something that Ahmad al-Shara had been co-opted by the Americans and by sometime in 2019. And I didn't focus on it at that time, but I should have noted that he gave two interviews on CNN and on PBS. I should have noted at that time that you do not, a jihadi doesn't get the chance to speak on CNN and PBS unless he has been co opted. And one should have kept an eye on that, which I did not. What happened is, according to me, we don't have full information so far, that the active role in ensuring this remarkable series of events was played by Turkey. Turkey has its own policies in the region, and we can discuss those. There have been suggestions that their president is looking at neo Ottomanism. In any case, they have been, President Erdogan has been very seriously interested in what is happening in Syria. His armed forces are about 50 to 60 kilometers deep inside Syrian territory, and he has been using his base to attack the Kurds. I feel that he then engineered this coup d'etat. He was able to get Ahmad al-Shara was actually a Turkish protege, and therefore it is a coalition of Turkey playing the lead role, Israel giving its consent, and the Americans rejoicing in this victory. The American interest was to get rid of the Iranians and the Russians from Syria, which is a great strategic coup. For the Israelis also, it is the same. To get rid of the Iranians from their border is an achievement. Also, the removal of the Hezbollah fighters who had been there for a very long time. So, this is, in the strategic terms, it is a very significant development insofar as the interests of Israel and the United States are concerned. We can speculate for a very long time why the armed forces of Syria collapsed. The obvious answer is that both Russia and Iran were distracted elsewhere and could not mobilize the massive support that Bashar al Assad would have needed. And they assessed fairly quickly that this was a lost cause. Russia protected him by moving him and his family to Moscow, but otherwise could not give him any other assistance. We also know that Iran instructed Hezbollah to leave. Hezbollah itself had been battered quite a bit during this period. None of the people who were the original supporters of Bashar al Assad, Russia, Iran, and Hezbollah, were in a fit condition to look after the interests of their protege. And that is why I would say that the Syrian army, possibly already demoralized, saw no reason why they should be sacrificing their lives for a lost cause. Once they saw all of these powers moving away, they decided that it would be far better to disband rather than become martyrs. And I think this reminded me very much of what happened with the Afghan army as the Americans were leaving. Nobody in the Afghan army wanted to become a martyr on behalf of Ashraf Ghani and also withered away. And on paper, they were shown as 200,000. But when the Taliban entered Kabul, nobody resisted them. Exactly the same thing took place now. And now, as of now, Syria has joined the Western camp, the Western alliance. You had one more fighter which is still active, and they are very unlikely bunch of people. The Houthis, always underestimated, the Houthis of Yemen. They were attacked very fiercely in 2015 by the Saudis, but they have held their own. And in terms of situation on the ground, there has not been much change. They continue to control the capital Sana'a, the port city of Hudaida, and the other city of Taiz. But 2 years ago, there was a ceasefire that was concluded in April 2022. The ceasefire held, but when the attack on Gaza began by the Israelis, the Houthis got into the picture and started sending their missiles, not just on shipping in the Gulf of Aden and the Red Sea, but also sending some of their missiles to Israel as well. Very recently, just a few days ago, Houthi missiles found their way in Israel, and from time to time, Israel and particularly the Americans have been hitting them. They are still there, not doing much damage, but making their position known that they would like the Gaza scenario to be settled. The war with regard to Iran is now well known to you. You have watched it on television. I don't need to elaborate too much. It has been declared by your president as a 12-day war. On 12 June, Israel attacked Iran. There was no previous indication that this would happen. And we will discuss in a minute what are the factors that encourage Israel to do this. There was a massive attack, counter attack from the Iranian side with their drones and missiles. Their air defenses, as expected, were quite weak and was hardly, not even a single Israeli aircraft appears to have been downed by ground fire. But the astonishing development was the massive attack on Israeli targets by the missiles and drones. On 22nd June, the United States entered the conflict, launched massive attacks upon 3 nuclear facilities, declared total success in this, and 2 days later, on 24th June, Trump announced a ceasefire. In between, on the 23rd, the the Iranians had sent a token attack on American facilities in Qatar. They did no damage at all. They were recognized as a symbol, as a token, and even Trump was not provoked, and he declared a ceasefire at that time. Several questions are there before us. Our answers can be only speculative at this point, but let us make an attempt. Why did Israel attack Iran? It would seem on first that this was a golden opportunity, an extraordinary moment. The Gaza war had provided the Israelis with extraordinary successes. And looking at Iran from Tel Aviv, you saw that Iran at that stage was possibly at its weakest. It had lost all its allies and had no ground support. Also, in the case of Netanyahu, he had some domestic reasons as well, because he was under pressure for the continued conflict in Gaza. His own people were agitated. International opinion was also turning against him because of the pictures of the attacks on people at the food camps, seeking for starving people, particularly children. He was looking now. His principal challenge was to get Donald Trump on his side. Now, in the first term, Donald Trump had been very supportive of Israel. But this time, there was a certain concern, legitimate concern. He didn't want a war. the previous three occasions when the Americans had gone to war in West Asia, Afghanistan, Iraq, and Libya, had not turned out well. Publicly, Trump has very severely criticized his predecessor. He named the attack on Iraq, he said, was the worst mistake, the biggest mistake that the Americans have ever made. Trump constantly said that he wanted to do a deal with the Iranians on the nuclear issue. He actually had 5 rounds of dialogue with the Iranians, and a sixth round was also fixed, which was to take place 2 days on a date that the Israelis had attacked 2 days earlier. So one could say the effort that the Israelis made was to was to pull out that old rabbit, and that is Iran is nuclear weapons program is imminent. Netanyahu has said this at least on 10 occasions in the last 20 years, and it has had no credibility as far as the Americans are concerned. Successive American presidents were told by their intelligence that there is no weapons program. But at the same, Netanyahu had scored two major victories vis-a-vis Iran. Number one, he had persuaded Donald Trump to withdraw from the nuclear agreement with the Iranians and to impose the sanctions on Iran, despite the fact that Iranians had adhered to this agreement. So in this background, he had a difficulty. According to Washington Post, the Israelis came up with some new intelligence data, which indicated that the Iranians could weaponize very, very imminently. Now, this went down well with Donald Trump, and he, I think, hesitated. His own support base is divided. You are aware of the domestic politics in this regard between the so-called MAGA movement and the Cold Warriors, the Cold War warriors, the neocons, or what have you. There's a divide. I think Netanyahu I think Trump wanted some time, but without waiting, I think some green signal may have been given vaguely or not. Israel attacked. Following the attack, Donald Trump immediately took full ownership of the assault, called it excellent, and began to threaten the Iranians extremely powerfully, and also threatened the assassination of the supreme leader. So Israel's gambit worked. This is an old gambit, but the fact that Netanyahu can manipulate American politics and American political leaders successfully. At the end, as the quote is from your media, what Netanyahu wants, as they call him Bibi, what Bibi wants, Bibi gets. And Jeffrey Sachs has done an interview where he says Israel owns the United States. What did Israel want to achieve? They wanted to achieve the destruction of the nuclear facilities, and then there was talk of regime change. I would argue to you that the Israelis were very deeply concerned that their assault upon Iran was not going the way they thought it would. There were immediate reports that the damage on the nuclear facilities, other than Natanz, the other two facilities, there was superficial damage. That means whatever firepower Israel had used, they had not been able to demolish these facilities. Even with regard to Natanz, the feedback was that they have not gone deep enough, and that Iran has considerable capability within itself. It is at this point, and then the second thing that happened was this massive assault upon Israeli targets from the Iranian drones and missiles. I do not believe that the Israelis were fully prepared for this intensity of the barrage. And this barrage continued day after day, every day for the entire 12-day period, including a few hours after the ceasefire came. I think it is around this time, roughly 3 or 4 days into the bombing, that the Israelis decided that they cannot go forward without the Americans coming on board. So they created the bogey of regime change. And the entire discussion since after that was regime change. Regime change is a very emotive issue in the United States. Large sections of the American right wing, particularly in the Republican Party, large sections of the Israel lobby salivate at the thought of regime change. Sensible people in the United States have said it is not going to happen, but it is a button that you press and you can press it successfully. I think this is what they use, a combination of reaching out to the United States, to Donald Trump, and winning him over through the bogey of regime change, because he alone had the bombs that could be effective, particularly at Fordow. Be that as it may, we can speculate about this later, but the fact remains Donald Trump, against his wishes, against his record, against his public statements, joined the fighting and then took extraordinary credit. What Netanyahu appears to have done, and which is constantly being done by people who engage with the president, is to play on his ego, play on the fact that he's a megalomaniac, wants to be a star in his own show, wants to be at the heart of everything, wants everyone to hang around him and say, what a great guy you are. And this sense of military assault, I think, gives him a special charge, makes him feel like a military commander. I have said that this is like Julius Caesar when he said, I want Israel, in Iran, unconditional surrender. This is that charge. It makes the charge. United States was not at war with Iran at that stage. They were actually in dialogue with each other. The next round was going to happen in a couple of days. And yet, the American president demanded unconditional surrender from an enemy it was not fighting. But this is, I think, it is it is a psychology. You can what Donald Trump had the choice: should I be the military commander or should I be the world's greatest diplomat? He wants both. So initially, with the hit on Iran, he became the great military commander who destroyed the nuclear facilities, and then became the world's greatest diplomat because he announced a ceasefire and is now looking at engaging with the Americans, with the Iranians, on a position of strength. But we have a problem, and the problem occurred immediately. That some report from the Pentagon was leaked that actually the fighting did not go as well. The bombing did not go as well as the Americans had thought. That it's still, the severe damage was done, but Iranians could possibly weaponize within a few months, that report said. And Donald Trump and his supporters were furious because this was taking away from this great leader the entire achievement, both as military leader and as diplomat. And very sensibly, very sensibly, the Iranians have admitted serious damage has been done to their facilities. I was worried at that time that if this business of no damage or limited damage, the Israelis would get the opportunity to continue their massive bombing on the Iranians. Fortunately for us, both Israel and Iran have had the good sense to declare victory. Israel has said a very powerful statement of rising lions that have roared. And of course, the supreme leader a day later said that they are victorious and that they have given a slap to the Americans, a very robust slap. And of course, in an separate interview, their foreign minister has said that this is a victory over Israel, because Israel couldn't fight the Iranians because of their great resistance and they had to go running to daddy. Be that as it may, this is what countries do, they posture. And now we have what happens now, we don't know. But three issues that are before us: ceasefire, will it hold? I would argue to you that it would. I can see no reason why Israel and Iran should take on this business of renewed fighting. particularly when it is not likely to go anywhere and serve no useful purpose. What about a nuclear agreement? A little bit of back and forth is going on, but a substantial interview from the UN permanent representative at at the Iranian permanent representative at the United Nations is a very conciliatory statement and addresses many of the issues that should concern the Americans, particularly about the enriched uranium, which the ambassador said we would be happy that it goes to a third country, more or less what was agreed to in the JCPOA all those years ago. What it means for regional politics remains to be seen. My own personal view is that the scenario will hold. I don't see the Gulf countries scurrying to the Americans at this stage. I think the carnage in Gaza has traumatized them. I don't think there will be any imminent normalization. No, I think over the last 4 years, 5 years, the Gulf countries have asserted strategic autonomy, and I don't believe they are going to give up on that. They will retain close ties with the Americans, particularly in defense and technology, but will give significant value to their links with other countries such as China, Russia, and the other Asian countries, including India. So this is where I will leave this very quickly. The what will Gaza look like? Gaza, in the short term, we don't even have a ceasefire. So all the points in my chart, in my slide, are questions. We don't know. There is a lot of loose talk going on about what is the maximalist demand from the Israeli side. The extreme right wing would like somehow, magically, these wretched Palestinians should disappear. They happen to be between 6 to 7 million. Taken together, they are possibly even a majority in that area, Israel and the occupied territories. Somehow magically, and you have the mouth-watering suggestions relating to Sinai for the Gaza and Jordan for the West Bank, and these newly cleansed, ethnically cleansed territories now become part of Greater Israel. It remains to be seen. I have a very sorry, very sad thing to say that the numbers we are roughly talking about is 6 million, which is the number of Jews who were annihilated in the Holocaust. The same number is being touted for resettlement, displacement, depopulation. The same number of Palestinians. A very ironical scenario that the very people who experienced the Holocaust are today subjecting their co-brothers, the children of Abraham, uh, with the same fate that was delivered to them by their enemies, the Nazis. The same number. At that time, you had the horrendous scenario, which we have seen in several films, of these innocent people brought down from their homes, men, women, and children, carted off in buses, taken to railway stations. The railway stations then took them to the concentration camps, and before you knew what was happening, they were dead. Is this the fate that is being put together for these same 6 million people who are today in the West Bank and Gaza? And this is the question I leave to you. There are many other questions and we can discuss those. What is likely to happen in West Asia? Is Israel the regional hegemon? On the face of it, the answer is yes, but commentators are saying that Israel's entire power is associated with its affiliation with the United States. Even when this main battle was going on, 20 months, 21 months since the war began with Hamas, not a single day has passed without a massive shipment of American weaponry into Israel. Now already public statements say that till some months ago, American weaponry valued at $20 billion had been supplied to Israel. So Israel, can you be a hegemon when you are so dependent on someone else? The answer possibly is no. But in terms of the region alone, Israel now is the regional military hegemon. Iran has lost its credibility, its military power, as well as its allies, and today looks extremely feeble as a strategic player. It will have to recover in some shape or form. This is an extraordinary challenge. But the Iranians have been through this challenge before in the context of the Iran-Iraq war. Today there could be a situation when they will reach out to the Chinese and the Russians and rebuild their infrastructure, their energy facilities, and over a period of time, military facilities as well. We have to see. I don't believe Saudi Arabia is looking at normalization just yet. We do not know what they are likely to be looking at. The story from Riyadh is that they want to focus on on economic issues. They want to be prepared for the for the green transition, and they want to use the next 20 years on that. They don't want to get involved with any conflict, and all the conflict in the region is a source of concern. I've already said before, and I repeat, I believe they are likely to uphold strategic autonomy, maintain ties with the Americans, but not become their subordinate ally as they used to be, but maintain very close and important relations with the Chinese and the Russians. The relationship of the Gulf countries with Iran will continue to flourish. I don't see any situation where they will go back to the earlier order. They will encourage a nuclear agreement of the kind that might happen, very similar to what the JCPO had been, with some cosmetic changes here and there, so that Donald Trump, earlier they had were allowed 3 to 5% enrichment. Possibly in this JCPOA, there will be no enrichment. And that, I think, Donald Trump could tout as his great achievement. Turkey is ambivalent at this point. It has reaffirmed its ties with the United States, but at the same time keeps very substantial relations with China as well as with Russia. It is in this background that you see, and of course, it is an active role player. At the end of the day, I would say that Turkey has certain Ottoman illusions. I don't think it has the capacity for that just yet, but we will need to keep an eye. There are books that their president has said the 21st century is the Turkish century, and a book has also come out with that title. We will have to see. I don't think that capacity exists, but the delusions certainly do. Can Egypt also now become a player in West Asian affairs? Very doubtful, because it is Saudi Arabia that appears to be the presence. It is the go-to capital for most countries in the region. Egypt's economy is still in very poor shape, and it is very dependent even now on Gulf largesse. It has ties with the Iranian, with the Chinese, and I think on that basis they will build up their economy as well. I have put down for form's sake what is the future of Palestine, and will there be any resolution? I doubt that. I do not believe. Very much in the remote future, there could be a certain change where the Israeli and the Palestinian, the Israeli, the Jew and the Arab have lived side by side in Palestine for 4 millennia. In Noor Masleh's book, he talks about that Palestine is your geographical identity, Palestinian. It has nothing to do with your faith. Your faith does not make you ethnically separate. We will one day hope that this wisdom and this vision dawns upon them. For the rest, ladies and gentlemen, I want to share with you some personal reflections. If anyone believed for a moment that the days of imperialism are over, we should remove that thought. I would say to you with all emphasis at my command that imperialism never withered away. The West that is dominant for the last 200 and odd years has ensured that its dominance is sustained. Therefore, the divide is very much there. Even at the NATO summit just now, Donald Trump spoke about, when he talked about the defense budget, of all the members being 5%, he categorically said, this is a great day for the United States, it's a great day for Europe, and it is a great day for Western civilization. The Western powers have a very clear understanding that they are hegemonic and they have to be in control. The second thing that these events that we have discussed have shown, the very significant, the vast divide between the capabilities, the military and technological capabilities of Western countries and the global South. Earlier, many of you will remember that these military encounters that our ancestors had with the West, they used to be completely one-sided. They would have 10 casualties against 5,000 on the other side. Go back to Napoleon when he came to Alexandria and see every contact, even those where the West came out second best. The casualties that they inflicted upon the countries of the global South, Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Vietnam, all the conflicts where the Western powers have used their firepower, you will find there is a very, very deep divide. And I want to emphasize this point, which is very self-evident. Western countries have been united. They had their quarrels with each other, and they had quarrels during, and they had competitions during imperialism and in the First and Second World War. But against the global South, they are united. On the other hand, in the global South, you do not have any vision of unity or working together. Most of the time, our principal competitions, confrontations, and conflicts are with each other. And very often, the Western powers are able to play divide and rule against us and obtain support from one of us for their purposes. But I emphasize to you that there is no way any country of the developing world is ever going to be co-opted and made part of the Western alliance. I want to make one more observation to you, that for the last 2000 years, the Jewish community was ostracized, was treated badly. They suffered humiliation, they suffered ghettoization, they suffered disabilities, and they suffered marginalization. Periodically, you had pogroms, and it culminated in the Holocaust. But today, the Jew and Israel are integrated with the Western alliance. So anti-Semitism, which used to be manifested in, in the 19th century, collectively for the Arab and the Jew, is today, the Jew is not included, though the single most important song that you hear from the Jewish side is anti-Semitism. Really speaking, it is the Muslim who has been separated and is the object of the deepest possible animosity. One more point, ladies and gentlemen. This is the end of Muslim power. Last time you saw any semblance of Muslim power, it would have been more than 200 years ago. And for helpfully, I have put a map before you, the Mughal Empire, the Safavid Empire, and the Ottoman Empire. The successors of these empires are about 30 states and odd. Each of them, therefore, the Muslim communities have been divided, I would say to you, deliberately. And many of you know the narratives of these divisions. Even in our own country, in South Asia, the way India and Pakistan were divided. The successor state of, particularly of the Ottomans, where you find a large number of Arab states that have emerged. There is therefore no prospect for several decades to come for any reassertion of Muslim power, any prospect of any Muslim entity asserting a strategic value on the global stage. What are we then looking at, ladies and gentlemen? We are looking at the possibility of a new world order, but it is an order that is on the Western side led by the hegemon, by the Americans. On the other side, they have concerns relating to China and Russia. Some of these countries, particularly from the global South, could join them. We are looking at a multipolar order. The Americans are encouraging a binary, a new Cold War. We do not know which way things will go. Some of us, including myself, are looking at resurrecting the old book by Samuel Huntington. That at that time when he wrote it 30 years ago, he talked about the clash of Islam, as it was called, Islam the faith and Muslims the people, with the liberal West. This was in the context of the rise of radical Islam. Much of it actually engineered by the West, which is completely left out in Huntington's book. Could this forthcoming confrontation, he speaks of the cynic civilization, the China, and he speaks of the orthodox civilization. Could you see an emerging competition and possibly confrontation of the cynic, the orthodox, and some sections of the Islamic civilization shaping a certain coalition against this, against the West? We do not know. It's too early to say, but it is just to remind you. Finally, on a very thoughtful note, look at the map in front of you without borders. This is the map of West Asia. Look at the vagaries of things. Over the last 2.5 or 3 millennia, you have had extremely, the Mesopotamia was the cradle of world civilization. Everything that is there in the world today, Mesopotamia, Persia, and Egypt, they provided humankind. This was erased from Western consciousness in the 19th century during the era of imperialism. Now some recovery is taking place, and How the World Made the West is a very important book in this regard. Most of us are familiar with this, but this is, you had the Persian Empire, which frequently conflicted with went into conflict with the Greeks. You had Alexander the Great who came up, and then and then you had the rise of Islam and the massive successes of Islamic arms, which dominated large parts of West Asia, also Central Asia, South Asia, and on this side, North Africa, and a large part of Southeast Europe as well, including separately, including Spain. And then you have the decline. So what you are seeing today is that cyclical movement of success and failure. And now you see in that entire history that I have narrated before you, particularly the last 2 millennia, you never had a major role played by the Jews. They were defeated by Nebuchadnezzar, who destroyed the first temple. And it is Cyrus the Great who then defeated Nebuchadnezzar and Babylonia, freed the Jewish people from exile, constructed the second temple, and is mentioned as a Messiah in the Old Testament. Today, the same Jewish people have taken arms against the Persian and the Arab, and the Turk on the other side stays away. The story of West Asia, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of 4 people: the Arab, the Jew, the Persian, and the Turk. The Turk over the last 1,000 years. These have dealt with each other, and from time to time, their destinies have been shaped by interventions from the West. We are seeing a repeat of things that our ancestors have frequently seen in the past. And on this note, let me stop at this point and ask Navtej to have his say before we go forward. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
So may I start?
Yes, sir. Yes.
All right. I think to speak after Ambassador Talmiz on West Asia is a fool's errand. So I'm not going to do much more than say a few words. I think his talk has covered so much of West Asia that there's very little said to say, and he's gone from the grand to the granular, and you have it all before you. Every time I listen to him, it is an absolute education, and I'm so grateful for this forum to have organized this to help us understand what is happening. I'm quite aware that there are already questions in the chat box, so I won't take much time. But from Ambassador Talmiz's grand presentation, I think I would just take out 3 or 4 points so that, you know, in our daily sort of analysis, we can see whether what is happening on those issues. And all of this, of course, he has mentioned. I think first is the immediate issue of Israel-Iran conflict. And this has been addressed in some detail. But I think from where I would like to start is that, you know, yes, there was a phenomenal window for Bibi, but it is also his desire to change his legacy. His legacy, he does not want to go down as either somebody indicted by the ICC. He does not want to go down as the watchman on duty on October 7, when the vaunted invulnerability of Israel was surprisingly broken, and it seemed like nobody was guarding the Gaza borders. So after that, there's been a steady deterioration, a demolition of the first circle of the Iran's proxies, which has been detailed by Ambassador Ahmad. And therefore, he saw this window. And he also had Trump in the White House. And we must remember that in 2018, it was under Israeli pressure or Israeli argument that Trump tore up the JCPOA. For whatever it was worth, it was the only treaty in town with Iran. So he gambled on this. He gambled with the initial spectacularly successful strikes on Iran and left the rest to, one, the Israeli lobby in the United States, and B, to Trump's weakness to get a chance to come in for a win, which looks like a win. And we must remember Trump needed a win. He hasn't been able to resolve Gaza or Ukraine, as he said that he would do within 24 hours or with a few phone calls, etc. He's somehow virtually given that up. Israel's vulnerability, I must mention, has been shown up again in this conflict. Although only now recent estimates are coming out today that only 6% of the Iranian missiles fired on Israel actually got through and were not shot down or did not go astray. And 6% did a fair amount of damage. We must remember Israel, compared to Iran, is a very, very small country. And Israel is not used to that sort of destruction. They've also been seen as to be lacking in the kind of bomb shelters that they need. These were prepared for the Scuds a long time ago, and obviously they have not been found to be sufficient. That having been said, I think there are two issues. What happens to Iran now? And I think the crucial question there, on which there are claims and counterclaims, but nobody quite knows what has been the damage to Iran's nuclear program. As the Iranian foreign minister said, yes, there has been significant damage. IAEA has said significant damage, but they do not have inspectors on site. They have inspectors in country, but not on site. Trump has said totally obliterated, but different analyses are now appearing as to the efficacy and as to the possibility of revival of a nuclear program. More so, revival of Iran as a resistor. If you saw the state funerals given to the military commanders today, It is a deliberate show of tremendous people coming, gathering around the flag. Will there be a negotiation? Nobody quite knows. Yes, they've made good noises, but then a negotiation at this stage will certainly mean zero enrichment. And I'm not sure whether Iran is willing to do that. Will Iran take the other extreme step, which is always on the board? Will they leave the NPT? Would they rather have a clandestine, even a rough bomb? These are questions. Of course, it means that there will be more punitive action by Israel and the United States. And will there be regime change? I mean, again, as Ambassador Talmiz said, this was an evolving target which came in during the conflict. It was not something which they started off with. Netanyahu is not, he's constantly raised the bogey of a nuclear Iran. But yes, if he gets regime change in the process and gets chaos like Iraq, he'd be quite happy with it. But whether that is going to happen, whether the clerical regime will give way to just a military regime or not at all. So this is something which we, frankly, at this stage, nobody quite knows. For me, besides what happens on Iran, and I won't go into the normalization issue because I think Ambassador Talmiz Ahmad has absolutely covered it wonderfully. And in fact, the most startling thing of his presentation I found was that there could be an imminent normalization with Syria. And I think that is something that we have to watch out for. It brings back to mind Gaddafi's statement that Israel will ultimately be bordering with Turkey. I don't know whether that's going to happen or not, but that's the kind of thought that it raises. What matters is, if you put normalization aside, is what is happening, going to happen on Gaza. Are we really going to get a complete ethnic cleansing? Is there going to be also an annexation of the West Bank, given that there's nobody stopping anything? And then what happens to the idea of a Palestinian state? Now everybody's talking again of a two-state solution when it is the furthest from everybody's mind. But what it has shown, what Gaza has shown, is that the divide, you see, this is not an Israel-Iran conflict. There were two nations. This is the occupier and the occupied. And there is a certain responsibility. And there is a tremendous disregard for international law, international humanitarian law, and all sorts of other things, which countries will have to deal with at some stage, unless we are going to go back into a complete anarchic kind of rule in the world, in which case, we may as well, Ambassador Ahmad talked about, West and the South, we may as well go into absolutely, old-fashioned wars and kill anybody and everybody we would like to. What is Israel's future? That's another question which has been under-examined, actually. Bibi Netanyahu is today more popular than he was in the last 2 odd years, because 80% of the Israelis, according to some poll, have actually supported his idea of an attack on Iran. About 50-odd% were supporting the campaign in, I can't call it a war, it is a campaign in Gaza. But they were also, those who were resisting that were resisting it because he was ignoring the hostages. It's not that they felt tremendously bad for the Palestinian people. What about US-Israel? I don't think that Donald Trump, frankly, cares a fig about, what happens to the Palestinian Palestinian people. He sees Gaza and the West Bank, if it's brought to him, as a real estate issue. And he has made that very clear. If they can clean it up, bulldoze it, and make a French Riviera out of it, or a Mediterranean Riviera out of it, I think he and his associates would be extremely happy. But he has the capacity to stop Netanyahu, as we have seen now, as we have seen in the ceasefire. Netanyahu was not keen on that ceasefire. He wanted to hit more targets, but ultimately he was bulldozed into accepting that ceasefire. But Trump, if he wants, can stop him. Biden, if he had wanted, could have stopped him. So I think if we blame the United States for what's happened to Gaza, I don't think we can blame Trump alone. We have to go right back to Biden. I think the Biden and Blinken statements, some of them were pathetically weak, and they could have done much more. Let me just round it off by saying that given all this situation, I mean, do you think that this attack on Iran, this degradation of the so-called existential threat, even if there is a regime change, is going to lead to peace in West Asia? Extremely, extremely doubtful. And that is why grand visions of plans like everybody will be normalized and everybody will be shopping in each other's malls, or grand visions like the I2U2, or frankly, even the IMEC, a corridor which takes it from India to the Middle East to Europe and crosses Haifa, which has now been hit. These are going to remain visions for a while. We still don't know ultimately how the Chinese and the Russians are going to come up and pick up the pieces. Because certainly the Russians may be distracted, but the Chinese are going to come in some form or the other, and they have been extremely cautious so far. I think I could go on, but I would just stop here because I can see lots of hands coming up on the questions. So if there's anything particular that I can contribute to, I'm sure Ambassador Talmiz will handle all of them. I'd be happy to. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Quite revealing and quite educational session. Now we'll do the question and answer session, but before that, just an announcement for the upcoming Saturday talk. It is more on the literature, finding a home for trauma in poetry, the journey of Sing Sliver Tongue, two speakers who have written a joint book, Sing Sliver Tongue, by Professor Basu and Professor Jusawala. They are going to talk, and the discussant is our Dr. Basudhara Rai. So over to Dr. Rafat Hussain for question and answer session.
Thank you, Dr. Raziuddin. So the question and answer session is open now. And before we begin the session, so there are two options. You can raise your digital hand or show your put your comment in the chat box. So it is an honor for the diaspora to have three ambassadors on the forum. Two are speaking and one is in attendance. So thank you, all of you. And thank you for Ambassador Talmiz Ahmad and Ambassador Sarna Saad. Thank you so much. It was a wonderful analysis. So before we begin, I would like to have Ambassador Ishrat Aziz for his comment, for his expert comment actually.
Okay, I'm visible?
Yes.
Well, I had lots of comments, but I would like to yield my time to others who will be having questions. So let me be very brief. The heart of the problem in Middle East has been that Israel seeks security not through peace, but through domination. Now, being a small country, I don't think it can really have peace through domination. And those who think that I am just making it up about Israel seeking security through domination, let me mention that there is a a document called A Clean Break, a new strategy for securing the realm, and this was drafted in 1996 by Daniel Pearl and a number of other firms. And what does it say? Its goals were remove Saddam from power. I mean, it said it. It's not something just a guess. It is there. End peace process paradigm. End peace process. Re-establish Israel's power of deterrence. And finally, Israel should act preemptively and unilaterally to counter threats. Now, this is very clear that Israel is seeking peace, security through domination, not through peace. And let us be very clear that there is no such thing as peace through domination. It's a megalomania. And also, one more point I want to make. Since 1967, Israel has consistently has acted in a way that has harmed the interests of the US in the region and beyond. It has done it all along, all the wars that you hear about in Iraq, in Syria, in Libya, in even and in Iran, also in Yemen. They were all done not because America had a problem with these countries, but because Israel thought they were a threat. So this kind of approach is not workable, because Israel, as a country with only 6 million people, can only dominate the region through American help. And America, because of its Israeli policies, America is becoming weaker. And this, to me, it's very strange, or it's incomprehensible that a country which depends so much on America for its survival really should do things which weaken it's like cutting the branch on which you sit. So I think that's one thing which is important, that Israeli policies, Israeli actions have weakened America, and they will continue to weaken America. And just let me conclude by saying that to seek security through domination and Iron Dome is a impractical idea, because the Iron Dome clearly was found to be not really adequate. And there cannot be an Iron Dome which can be really protective. It can easily be penetrated by a salvo of missiles, which will be very inexpensive, but the Iron Dome itself is a very expensive idea. And of course, there is no such thing as Golden Dome. So I think Israel should seek security through peace in its own interest, rather than the megalomaniac idea of dominance. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Aziz. So let's go to the chat box, and there are a few very interesting questions from Dr. Iram Gul. So let's begin. Don't you think that the establishment of new Syrian regime is the proof of Daesh and ISIS as the creation of the US, just like Israel in the midst of the Arab lands, so that these countries can progress and utilize their resources for themselves, but have to depend on developed world? And I will come to the other two questions later. Please go ahead. Ambassador Ahmad.
If you don't mind, you could ask from 4 or 5 questions,
Okay,
and then between Sarna and I, we will
sure.
respond to them. And then
Okay,
we
so
can
let's,
close shop.
because there are 3 questions from Dr. Irangul. So let's, so that's the one on Daesh and ISIS. And if all the Arab countries recognize Israel, the war in Middle East and the cruelties of the Palestinian would end. That's another question. And how Jews can claim themselves as Semitics. They have been living in chunks in various regions of the world, and they mingled there, married there, and must have no pure traits of Semitics, isn't it? So let's deal with those.
Sorry, I didn't hear the third question. What is the question?
Question is, are they really pure Semitics? Because they have been living in different parts of the world.
Yeah.
Okay, let's deal with these 3 questions and then I will move on.
The first question was about Syria. What
Yeah.
was the actual question? That the setting up of the Syrian regime?
No,
आपका वॉल्यूम बहुत कम ना है, आपको जरा बढ़ाना पड़ेगा थोड़ा सा आपका वॉइस बहुत हल्की आ रही.
Ahmad Saab, can you increase your volume?
Yeah, just hold on. It's already max. Yeah.
Thank you. So
Okay.
let me repeat that
Yeah,
question.
what is the first question on
Okay,
Syria?
I'm gonna to repeat it. Okay. So the question is, don't you think that the establishment of the new Syrian regime is the proof of Daesh and ISIS as the creation of the US, just like Israel in the midst of the Arab lands, so that these countries can progress and utilize them? Basically, the question is that is
Okay,
it
fine. I got the question. Yeah.
okay?
Yeah. If you don't mind, Navtej, I will reply to the one on Syria. You could reply to the one about if all the Arab states were to recognize Syria, the problem would be done. And I will also do the Semitic one. With
Okay.
regard to the Syrian question, I am very uncomfortable with conspiracy theories, because unless you have solid evidence, it's very easy to sit in your drawing room and build up these major conspiracies. The Islamic State emerged as a consequence of the American occupation of Iraq and certain things, certain policies that they followed during the occupation. But I cannot agree that the United States sponsored the creation of the Islamic State. The Islamic State was a response to the American occupation and the empowerment of the Shia community and the divide in the country between the sectarian groups. So I don't think that is particularly helpful to say that they actually did it. With regard to Syria, it was, you had Abu Muhammad Jolani isolated in Aleppo. He had been there for a very long time. He enjoyed the he had very little under his control. Even in Aleppo, there were several groups. I think the without American support and the Turkish patronage, there is no way Abu Muhammad Jolani could have reached Damascus. So on that, I have no doubt about it. And the way he has been now co-opted. The stakes are very high to get rid of Iran and Hezbollah and Russia from Syria, to snap the link based on resistance between Syria and Iran, which had been in place for 50 years, and to get Syria to finally normalize with Israel at some stage. These are very remarkable achievements of the Americans working together with Turkey. Turkey may have its own agenda. US has its own agenda, but it is a success. It has surely harmed the situation, the geopolitical situation, as far as from the Iranian perspective. What implications this has in coming months and years, we have to still see, because these are very early days. And when the conflict is still on, it is not easy to make judgments and make assessments about the future. Navtej, would you like to comment on whether if all the Arabs were to recognize Israel, there would be peace in the
Peace.
region?
Yes, of course, there would be, but don't put it on the Arabs. It would also mean that they would have to find a solution to the Palestinian issue. Depends on what are the terms of normalization. If there is a Palestinian state to which Israel agrees to, according to the UN resolutions, and then the Arabs normalize as they had, the Arab League plan, etc. Everything says bases normalization on a certain creation of a Palestine state. So obviously, if that first step is taken and then there's normalization, then that's a good recipe for peace. But if you are saying that they should simply normalize and throw the Palestinians under the bus, then I'm afraid they won't be able to do it because even if the autocratic rulers may want to do it, the Arab street will ultimately not be able to accept that in good conscience. And at the same time, I don't think there will be any lasting peace, which is why the so-called Abrahamic Accords have not really led to any peace. In fact, we've seen terrible things happen after that.
Thank
There's
you.
a question with regard
Semitic
to
question, Dr.
about Semitism. The point is well taken. The people who have lived together, the Palestinians and the Jews, they are actually the same people from the very beginning. People at different times have followed different faiths, but just following a different faith does not give you a new or separate ethnicity. Ethnicity remains the same, and people follow different religions. In fact, Noor Masleha has made the point that there was diverse religious groups living in the broad area of Palestine. Having said this, it is a 19th century construct, largely under the influence of the Zionist movement, where the idea that the Jews constitute not just a separate religious group, but a separate ethnic group, which makes them the unique chosen people of God, it is really a 19th century construct. But it has now been very deeply embedded as part of the creation of a separate Jewish identity, separate unique identity of Jews, and an identity that enables them to claim the land of Palestine for their exclusive
उसी के
purpose.
लेवल के सब radicals चाहिए space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's for their exclusive
हम
purpose.
पता नहीं
Now,
कैसे tolerate हो जाते हैं.
Okay, can you?
and that is the reason. In the early 1990s, there was a testing of the DNA of Jews and Palestinians, and it was found that the DNA is identical, and that project was completely stopped at that time. Anyway, the fact remains, let us do away with this ethnicity business. It is an embarrassment. This idea of a unique Jewish ethnicity is absolutely bogus, because we know that there are books which have been written that numerous communities at different places in Eastern Europe and other parts of Europe converted to Judaism. So it's not as if you have one pure, uninterrupted DNA for the last 3,000 years.
Very
Okay,
good. Thank you. Okay, Dr. Saeed Zadi from the raised hand. Saeed Zadi. Okay, so.
No, I'm here.
Okay,
I
great.
I've been waiting. So very good and eloquent talk. We talk about one big element and one small elephant which become big by US. So let's talk about the two other big elephants and a small elephant, which could be big again. I'm talking about China and Russia. In short term, which is 1 to 5 years, and long term, 5 to next 50 years. Because Pakistan is the small elephant, which we didn't talk about, Israel is looking at. So let's talk about that, and I'll appreciate it.
I'm sorry, I don't know what you want me to talk about.
Yeah, what about the Pakistan role in this whole saga?
What I'm saying is that in the short term, of course, the China interest is more economy. They don't want to deal with any wars. But I visited China last year, I'd say 9 months ago. What China is very different what I thought it would be. They are way advanced. They are in technology and economy. Russia is busy with Ukraine, and there will be a deal in next coming year or more with Ukraine, and they will be free. So they have to show their dominance somewhere. And of course, the Pakistan is weak, but they have nuclear power. So how that going to be play in short term and a long term in coming?
Yes.
Let me clarify. Let me respond. We are in a state of flux, and many things are uncertain. So whatever we say could have a there would be very different developments fairly quickly. With regard to China and Russia together, there is very little doubt that they are part of the effort to challenge Western hegemony. And the West is aware of it and takes this effort seriously. It is the Chinese as of now are talking about a multipolar world order, where a large number of middle powers and smaller countries don't have to choose between one and the other, but become players in a larger community of nations. And this is what they are looking at, and this is where they would like to go. That means the effort is relatively benign on the face of it. They play down the strategic and political and military aspects and focus more on uh, economic cooperation, infrastructure development, technology, logistics, etc. And whenever they have to intervene in any scenario of conflict or competition, they focus on diplomacy rather than military force. This is quite attractive so far. The way they were able to put together Iran and Saudi Arabia, it indicates that countries are interested in having an engagement with China. Which way this will evolve, I really cannot say, and I will request Mr. Navtej Sarna to speak about this. But very quickly about Pakistan, what I have noted is that during the recent encounter, the India-Pakistan encounter, it it seemed as if Turkey was making a very major overture towards Pakistan. And since then, we have also seen that the United States would like to have a certain substantial and important relationship with Pakistan. Where these two will go, I will again request Mr. Navtej Sarna to comment on this and perhaps illuminate us.
I don't think this really plays into our immediate area of discussion. This can, we can go into different directions on this. But yes, I think the important player here, I would say, is China. And otherwise, we can that is the main player who is relevant, because China does have major interests in Iran. China has also had substantive investments in Iran, but China has been very, very cautious in this last episode. So I think they will come in and see what they need to do in terms of countering American dominance in places. If suppose the Iran regime was to fail, then you would see more activity both from Russians and the Chinese on this regard. I really don't know. I mean, we can discuss, but then we are, I think, going far away from what we have been discussing, unless there's a very specific question which we'll be happy to attempt. Thank you.
Thank you both. So before I invite Dr. Sayyid Amir, let me ask one more question. So Israel is a democratic country. Are they only interested in wars and don't want to replace Netanyahu?
Sorry, I didn't understand the question at all.
So the question is that Israel is a democratic country. Are they only interested in wars and don't want to replace Benjamin Netanyahu, the current prime minister?
I think Navtesh, why don't you?
No, you see, Netanyahu has been a very successful prime minister for Israel for in 2 long stints, and he has actually won elections. So he is a democratically elected leader. Before October 7, 2023, Israel was going through several months of internal turmoil because he wants to make some very fundamental changes in the policy making and decision making apparatus of Israel, in particular the relationship between the executive and the judiciary. And there were very wide protests across Israel. Israelis in peacetime can be a very, very vocal and a chaotic sort of democracy. But the fact is that Netanyahu manages to bring the country together every time he perceives or projects, or there is, in fact, an external challenge, like October 7 was an external challenge, and even people who differ from him became part of his cabinet. Now, people say that an election could happen. He is not yet certain of winning the next election, but certainly he is in a better position today than he was before the attack on Iran. So I don't think that they don't have anybody else. They do, but he's a great survivor.
Thank you. Dr. Sayyid Amir, please.
Thank you. I very much enjoyed the talk and learned quite a bit. Both ambassadors and Ambassador Ahmad does nice narration of the history, and Ambassador Sarna, very erudite how the way you analyzed it briefly. One thing I always find difficult to accept or appreciate is people from the South Asia, me included, we used to consider Islamic world as some kind of a monolithic entity, which in fact it isn't. I mean, even you can see in recent conflict, there was no great demonstration of sympathy for Israeli action against Israeli actions or attack on Iran. So this is a kind of a misconception we have lived for over a century. There's a monolithic entity which will come to our aid or which can be developed as a unity. I don't suppose it is. What amazes me is how these so-called Islamic countries, Muslim countries, most recently Iran, in way they have failed to develop. I mean, you can imagine Israel having such a efficient network of spies, exactly could identify where the commanders are, where the scientists are, and they decapitated them without any effort. They were even, and I believe it, Netanyahu says, we could have killed Ayatollah Khomeini if we wanted or decided it. Reportedly, it was stopped by Trump for whatever reasons. It's amazing. They killed some years ago, I remember, they killed a Palestinian activist in UAE in his bed in a hotel. So imagine how they killed the Hezbollah operatives in Beirut. You got to admire it, whether you like it or not. We are opposite side, but it is unfair not to accept the ability of Israel to do all that. Yes, They are supported by American. But I think in our talk, we have given excessive credit to America. I think America, yes, it helps with money and all that. But the people who conduct all that are Israelis, Hamas, and the IDF. They do atrocities, whatever. I mean, and look at our side in Gaza, the they have killed so many people, and it's still Hamas is holding on to the knowing Israeli prisoners, knowing that it will only bring devastation. No sense. I mean, there is no sense diplomacy. They could have come to an agreement with Israel long time ago because Netanyahu came and have got much better terms of survival, even possibly a Palestinian state. But every time we said no or they said no. So I could go on, obviously, and I'm sure everybody knows, but I would like to see some sense of realism, and that's how it is. It isn't emotionally. We have to do something better. Just getting American arms and I know Pakistan got it, Egypt got it, and money is going to make us great. No, it's not. We have to have intrinsic ability to utilize that. Now, mullahs in Iran, and I have every sympathy. I feel so sorry. They haven't done anything. I mean, in the sense of achieving power. I remember Shah. I was a student in England where Shah of Iran was there. There were a lot of students from Iran, technology, and they're all there learning there. And it has such a huge potential. Finally, I will stop and I will ask the two distinguished one question, ambassadors. India used to be a great supporter of Palestinians and their plight and in the United Nations and everywhere else. It doesn't seem to be now. It's just the opposite. Modi, Prime Minister Modi, seemed to be very great friend of Netanyahu. I can guess some of it myself, but maybe I thought you might enlighten a little bit more. Thank you for your patient listening.
The main point you have made at the outset that this term Islamic world is a misnomer. It's a very confusing term.
Could you please speak up a little bit? I have a problem hearing all that.
Amir bhai, that's the max.
That's what?
That is the maximum he has.
Oh, okay. All right.
Okay, there is this term that is used so often, Islamic world, is a misnomer. I agree, and I don't like the use of that term at all. It was constructed again in the 19th century when the imperialist powers were taking power away. Their main enemies at that time were Muslim countries, which is why this whole idea of a monster called Islam and Muslims was constructed. With regard to the sources of the present day malaise, it is, as I said to you, that you must regard Israel as a Western country totally nurtured by the Americans in terms of its prowess. There, I don't see any light between these two countries. They are, by and large, they have developed on the basis of the synergy between them. Having said this, I want to simply flag one point, and that is whenever the Americans have pursued an agenda in a nation country militarily, over a period of time, their strategic goals were never realized and they had to pack and leave in ignominy. If you look at Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Iraq, and to some extent Libya, these are regarded as defeats for the Americans. In fact, I would say to you aggressively that the Americans have lost every war, not every battle, every war since the Second World War. Now, the price that countries pay for this resistance to the United States is very high in terms of casualties, which is why Israel never does a long war. It wants it, and also the enemies that Israel has are mostly militia. There is no, or Iran is the only country, but it was a kind of air war. It was not a conventional war. Obviously, wars have changed today, and you are not likely to see too many of the wars that you had in the Second World War with massed armor and artillery, etc. Things have changed. With regard to the prevailing malaise in large sections of it is not just the so-called Muslim countries that have this malaise. most countries today in Asia, Africa, and Latin America have levels of development that are far less than their potential. And they have leaderships that have not always served effectively their people's interests. Those are issues that are outside the remit of this discussion. But yes, the point is that you see, in many regimes, every time people say this regime never did this regime, which regime is there in West Asia that can actually effectively do anything? Every time people ask me, "Well, Arab world, there is nothing happening in the Arab world." Which Arab? Again, Arab world is as useless a term as Islamic world, because the Arab world is not a monolithic entity. They pass resolutions. They pursue matters in the United Nations. If you ask UAE or Saudi Arabia, what did you do? They will give you a long list of things they have done. But we want somehow magically something to change in the region, that there is a coalition that is effective against Israel. That doesn't happen. That doesn't happen at all. Even if you recall the 73 war, which was a conventional war to a great extent, and initially the Egyptians were successful, the counter-attack that Israel did threatened both Cairo and Damascus, and was going to take the entire third army of the Egyptians prisoner. So even that is the closest in a conventional encounter. Two of the best armies of the Arabs fighting together against the Israelis were outmaneuvered.
Thank you. So there are only a few minutes left, so I wanted to wrap up and take few more questions. And so the one is a very simple, quick question. How did Sunni Shia divide shape the Middle East politics? Although it's a big one, but I want you to address it quickly, and then
There is no Sunni Shia divide in terms of the politics. I don't think it is vibrant. The Americans had deliberately introduced it in Iraq. I don't think it is today. Even Iraq has given up much of it. Today, it is not relevant to the dynamics of West Asian affairs. And I think most countries have moved on from that.
Thank you so much. And good to hear that. And Dr. Nazir Ahmad, and then we will end up with Ishrat Aziz Saab's comment.
Two quick questions, interrelated. In the overall paradigm of the regression of American power globally and the rise of China, the accommodation of China in the old paradigm of American domination, my study of history shows that anytime you have such a situation where one empire is on its way down, another empire is rising, there is conflict. And if we draw a line connecting the centers of power, China, Middle East, South Asia, India, and Europe, they all intersect through Iran. So I wonder how it's going to get all resolved out. My specific question relates to the genocide in Palestine. The word has not been used today. Wars, when they come to an end, the sequel to them depends as much on how the war ends as to the terms on which the war ends. If this genocide takes its course, as it already has, almost half the people have been affected one way or the other, would it necessarily lead to a stable situation in West Asia, indeed in the world?
Navtej, you may like to.
I really can't answer this question. It's so speculative. I know kind of you've used the term genocide. I mean, I don't call it a war to begin with. It's not a war. It's not a question of ending the war. It's a question of or what happens to Gaza. That is what I raised earlier. What happens to Gaza? What happens to the aspirations of the Palestinian people? Do they continue to exist at all in the original Mandate Palestine area, or are they going to be all moved somewhere else? Now, these are such open questions that for anybody to try and give a yes or no answer, I don't think it's going to it's possible. Certainly not for me.
Thank you. So let's wrap up with the Ambassador Ishratalji Saab's comment, please.
I am supposed to make a comment.
Well, you said that you wanted to make, or I misread it.
But
I think Ambassador already made his comments.
Yes, he already made it. Rafat already made it.
I just made basically two comments. I said there is no thing as
Yes, of course.
security through domination, not for a small country. And that is the mistake Israel has made after 67. It has sought to achieve security through domination. When you want peace, you must strive for peace and not for domination. Thank you.
Thank you. My apology, I read the old comment. Thank you so much. And thank you both speakers. It was a wonderful analysis and I really liked it. And of course, thanks to the all audience. And now back to Dr. Raziuddin.
Well, I have nothing else to add. It was a wonderful session. You must be tired quite late there in India. And thank you all. Quite educational. Thank you.
Thank you.